So they did it again on MSNBC. Jen Psaki.
Inside Jen Psaki.
I love
going inside.
I like how they make width really small, so you just read inside Jen Psaki to make people think like, hey, maybe you got a shot with her. Better watch.
I used to work on a show that had a really gross name like that. Like the name was like, oh.
So
I used to joke we'd do like press about it, like people just like, oh.
So Jen Psaki did it again, Kurt. She went. She's pretending that Donald Trump. She's trying to scare people by saying that Donald Trump is going to prosecute his political enemies. The thing that Biden administration and the Democrats are currently doing, and they're all currently slowly torturing and trying to kill Julian Assange, the greatest, most decorated journalist of our generation. Right now, she leaves all that out.
Is this new or the one?
No, it's a new one. There's another one.
God.
There's another one.
Is Trump really going to do that? Now I'm getting hope.
This week, Donald Trump took to Truth Social, which he often does, with what may have sounded just like another one of those crazy unhinged rants. But he was very specific this time. He attacked this network in particular, MSNBC. He's attacked other networks and other members of the media often over the past couple of years. He called for the U.S. government in this particular post to come down hard on MSNBC and promised that there is more to come. He also talked about himself in the third person, always a red flag in my book, and he included his middle initial in that too. But once you get moved beyond that kind of weird detail of his post, Trump is promising to resort to an authoritarian tactic should he become president again.
You mean the authoritarian tactic the guy you used to work for has been employing against Julian Assange for the last 10 years? You mean that authoritarian tactic?
And also on Trump.
And how about the authoritarian track that the guy you worked for the last 3 years is now using against Donald Trump? You mean that authoritarian tactic? This is, again, I cannot get over how dumb the people who watch this show have to be to swallow this bullshit. Do you know how uninformed you have to be? You're watching a news show. These people watch news all day, and they know nothing about what's actually happening.
Did a bunch of the viewers of MSNBC, did they make the mistake of saying they doubted the COVID vaccine, and they have to make up for it by watching MSNBC?
I think that's
like
it.
De Niro had to?
Yeah.
Does the federal government have any role in the oversight of a cable news network? No, they actually don't. But that's not really the point here. What's important here is that
just for Twitter?
The point here is that I'm going to pretend that our political enemies are the exact opposite of what we're doing. They're not. We're actually the thing. Every accusation she makes is a confession. That's the important point here. Every accusation they make against Donald Trump is a confession of what the Democrats, Joe Biden, and the corporate media hacks like her are currently doing. And this is how little she thinks of her own audience, that she can just bullshit them bald-faced like this. Unbelievable. I mean, this really does take balls.
Do you remember, Jimmy, a long time ago when Liz Winstead was she created that,
She created The Daily Show.
Okay. And I don't know what any of her politics at this point are, but I remember seeing an interview with her that I think she said something real smart, which was she didn't like how Jon Stewart's Daily Show, they would have politicians on, like your Jen Psakis of the day, and they would like joke and whatever. And she's like, no, don't let them, they don't get to be the guy. Like, don't fraternize with the politicians on the show. And she's dead right. Because look at this despicable abomination of a show where a government official now has like, look at the writing on the show, like a quasi Comedy Central title. Like,
Trump threatens to come down hard on MSNBC.
Look at the font inside with Jen Psaki. Look at that cutesy ass font. This is repulsive. Like, this is like the most. And she goes, the government doesn't tell basic cable news what to do. Is that just reserved for me on Twitter? And just the little people, of course, we need more of that. You don't tell a giant corporate news outlet.
The government could come down on anybody else, but just not a giant news corporation.
That's real. That's what they meant the whole time about attacking journalists.
Yes,
attacking a corporate-owned press outlet.
Right. They don't care about actual citizen journalists. They don't care about journalists on Twitter or Facebook or here on YouTube. They can attack the shit out of them, suppress them, censor them, and deplatform them all they want. What they mean is you can't go after the puppet masters, the corporations. And that's who she is. She's a mouthpiece of a corporation.
A frenemy of the people.
She was a exactly. So let's keep going.
threatening to use the power of the government against media he believes is being critical of him. Now, believe me, I know from experience, from many, many days and hours at the briefing room, that the relationship between the U.S. government and the free press can be tense at times.
Ugh.
And
Now, this is the part where she tries to add credibility. Like, hey, I get it. There's a real adversarial relation between the government.
This
and
one
the,
black guy wouldn't shut up at my president hearing
This one
from
black
Africa.
guy wouldn't shut up.
I'd have him thrown out when I had my cake.
She had such an adversarial relationship with the press that they thanked her for her service when she was leaving the press secretary office. On her last days, I thank you for your service, and they all gave her an applause. That's the opposite. They're supposed to hate your guts, and they didn't. Why? Because the journalists in the press room, 99% of them, work for the same people that Jen Psaki and Joe Biden work for. The same handful of billionaires.
She got a job with them after.
And then they gave her a job. So she didn't have to change people who she worked for. The same people who she worked for when she was at the White House working for Joe Biden as the billionaire class. The same people who own this network, which is why she got a job. She didn't get a job because she's a great journalist. She got a job because she's a willing mouthpiece of the oligarchy. And that's what this is. And now watch how into detail she goes. She gives so when you give too many details like this, that's how you know she's lying. And she knows she's lying. Watch this. She gives way too many details.
both of the presidents I worked for they had their own moments of unleashing their media critiques when they didn't like a story. And when I think about the role of the free press and how essential it is for our democracy, I often think about my time as spokesperson for the State Department. Because I got into it a lot with a reporter named Matt Lee from the Associated Press. He is still there. He has long been the dean of the press corps, and he has earned that right. He probably knows more about foreign policy than a good percentage of the people working in the building. Lee became so well known for grilling me and many other press secretaries during the outbreak of the war in Ukraine that he became kind of a bit of a folk hero in the Kremlin. They portrayed him as someone who was holding the U.S. to account, who was standing up to power.
Are you kidding?
To be clear, he wasn't pushing Russian talking points, not at all. The Russians just liked that this American reporter was tough and combative and was pushing back on me and others in the briefing room. At one point, I asked Lee about this, and his response stuck with me. He basically said, whether the policy is good or bad or smart or makes sense or not, which obviously he was going to push us on, the U.S. government has multiple briefings a day at the White House, the Pentagon, the State Department, and journalists can go and push and ask questions. The Russians may applaud me, as in him, at these events, but they have none of that. They don't have a free press there, a free functioning press in Russia. I haven't thought of Lee's words when I was at the White House.
What?
I don't know how this has anything to do with Russia, but FYI, we do not have that in the United States either. We do not have a free functioning press because right now, Joe Biden is trying to kill the greatest journalist of our generation. He's slowly torturing him and setting an example for the rest of the press corps that if you do your job properly and you expose war crimes of the oligarchy and the U.S. military, you will be put in prison. He's in Belmarsh right now for doing just that. He exposed war crimes of the oligarchy and the U.S. military, and they've been persecuting him and torturing him for the last 10 years straight. And that's what's actually going on right now. And then in a second, I'm going to show you that Obama did the exact same thing. But let's let her keep going with her fantasy about how we have a free press in the United States and somehow Russia doesn't.
Because it was a reminder that even when things were combative, and they were at times, even when reporters kept pushing and questioning, as was their job, that was democracy working.
They didn't have one goddamn question about the Ukraine war. They didn't have one goddamn question about Libya. They didn't have one goddamn question about Syria. They didn't have one goddamn question about lockdowns, masks, vaccines, mandates, herd immunity, natural immunity, ivermectin, the source of the virus, who funded the virus. They didn't have any questions about any of that shit. What did they push back on you against? The only person who pushed back on you was a black guy from Africa, and you had him kicked out of the press room.
How?
This is all fantasy. This is all fiction that we have somehow a functioning democracy in America, and B, your democracy was stolen from you decades and decades ago, which is why there's homeless people under every bridge in the richest country in the world, and instead of sending $100 billion to our cities to fix that, we send $100 billion to the most corrupt country in Europe without any oversight whatsoever, because this is not a democracy. It's a money laundering organization called the U.S. government. That's what's going on, and that's why she has this job, because she serves that money laundering organization. That's why she's a mouthpiece. She's your enemy. She's trying to make you think Donald Trump is your enemy. Donald Trump is the enemy of the oligarchy because he wouldn't do war in the way they wanted him to. That's what this is all about, baby. He wouldn't start wars. He was only president of my lifetime who didn't start a war.
That maniac.
That maniac.
Why is she praising this, talking about this guy saying it doesn't mean you're a Russian agent if you ask questions that help Russia because they're true? So what is he, the first reporter in history not really stomped on
right.
for doing that, or just anyone? Well, Jackson got banned off of YouTube for
telling the truth about Ukraine.
That they're now telling. That even Lindsey Graham won't lie about anymore.
That is what a free press is supposed to do.
Oh.
And it doesn't
now
exist everywhere in the world. In fact, it's diminishing in the world. So Trump's Truth Social post may have seemed unhinged and crazy and random and like you could ignore it.
It didn't seem any of that to me, by the way.
It's the most...
It was actually...
the most stable genius thing I've ever heard him say.
Yes.
Though a threat to the free press, a threat to democracy. And that threat comes at a time when a record total of 530...
And you know where most of those journalists are being killed and imprisoned right now? In Israel, in Gaza. And she's not going to mention that. You mean the one that you support? You mean the slaughter of journalists?
A lot of people in the world. It's around the world.
A lot of different other places in the world. You mean the slaughter of journalists that you support? You know, I'm on a kill list from the Ukraine government that you support. I, myself, personally, am on a kill list from the Ukraine government, a government and a war that you support. So don't, your crocodile tears for journalists. She doesn't give a shit about journalists, doesn't give a shit about journalism. She's just using this as a way to try to beat Donald Trump and scare you. Your free press doesn't exist in America. Don't be a fucking sucker for these people.
They didn't try to take the guy's livelihood like they did Simon Atiba when he got a little bit too...
Simon Atiba, he asked questions and they took away his way to fund his news organization. Stripe, you had to pay a membership to Simon Atiba's website to get his news. They took away Stripe, which is a money, what do you call it? They facilitate you taking payments from people.
Yeah.
They took that. You need Patreon, you need Stripe, you need PayPal, you need one of these billionaire-owned things so you can actually do business.
Yeah, right.
You can have financial transactions. Okay, here we go.
3 journalists are currently detained worldwide. That's according to Reporters Without Borders. A large number of them are being held by the sorts of authoritarian regimes that Trump envisions creating here at home. These are countries being led by his role models, like Russian President Vladimir Putin, who Trump called very savvy and a genius for his actions in Ukraine.
Dum-dum?
Yeah, well, he is very savvy and a genius because he kicked your ass in Ukraine, and his country and their economy is now stronger than ever, whereas Europe is now paying 4 times the rate for energy than they were before the war, and the United States is in, how many trillions? 35, 68, $75 trillion in debt? And everybody's laughing at your demented president as he helps enable a genocide right in front of everyone's eyes. So again, this is the worst sleight of hand. By the way, their hair matches.
Let me guess. Trump didn't praise him. He said he was very smart or something. And
yes. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Russia, an American journalist, Evan Gershkovich, has been detained for 249 days simply for doing his job.
What about Julian Assange? She just won't mention Julian Assange. And you know why? Because it blows up her whole argument. Because it reveals that she is the oppressor. It reveals that the person she worked for, Joe Biden, is the fascist who is an enemy of journalism. That's why she won't mention, and she won't mention Edward Snowden either.
Or Gonzalo Lira, or Ukraine.
That's right.
An American they're allowed to just imprison?
Trump has also repeatedly praised the leadership style of China's President Xi Jinping. over 100 journalists are currently detained in China. And over the last couple of years, several foreign journalists from major outlets have been expelled entirely from the country. Putin and Xi are models for Trump. We know that. Leaders who
but you don't want to mention that in Ukraine, Zelensky literally outlawed his political opposition and closed down any news agency that was critical of his administration. You can't mention that, right? You can't mention that they also imprisoned American journalists in Ukraine. You can't mention any of that. So she won't mention Julian Assange. She won't mention Edward Snowden. She won't mention Godzilla Laura. She won't mention what they're supporting in Ukraine. She won't mention any of it. She won't mention the genocide that you're supporting. And and the people who watch this have to be the dumbest people in the world who are still interested in news.
And silence journalists, leaders who do not tolerate free speech. That's what Trump is threatening. And if you don't think he's eager to use those tactics, if you don't think he is dying to silence his critics in the media, think again.
Are they going to have, is their next story going to be how Elon Musk's not doing enough to tamp down on hate speech?
How many stories have they done about that?
Christ.
Elon Musk isn't censoring enough. Edward Snowden says Julian Assange is a political prisoner, and the sole reason he remains a political prisoner is because the White House remains afraid of his voice. So, but what would Edward Snowden know about suppressing actual journalism? He's probably tweeting from his ivory tower that he's not allowed to leave.
Hey, he left a mass dump of intel. By the way, if he did that, I don't give a shit.
Me too.
If he dumped, good.
And so, do you want to know who? Again, she'll never mention that Barack Obama used the Espionage Act to prosecute journalists more times than all the presidents before him combined. She'll never tell you that. This PolitiFact. The Obama administration has used the Espionage Act to go after whistleblowers who leak to journalists more than all previous administrations combined. PolitiFact says 100% true.
More than Nixon?
More than Nixon. More than all the presidents before him
Woodrow
combined.
Wilson?
You know, and by the way, when I heard the phrase Espionage Act, I thought they were talking about how Russiagate was all an act. But that's not what they're talking about.
See his act? His Espionage Act?
The Espionage Act? It's called Russiagate.
Somebody gets beat
it's a big act.
Cool. The aristocrats.
So she won't tell. That was in PolitiFact, January 2nd, 2014. So you know Jen Psaki knows this. She just omitted that. Why? Because Jen Psaki's actually the liar. Jen Psaki's actually your enemy. She's actually the enemy of the people. Jen Psaki, President Biden, MSNBC, corporate news, they're actually your enemy. They're the enemy of the people. And I know you're not supposed to say that because that was said by some kind of right-wing dictators also. Well, sorry, if it's true, it's true. Jen Psaki, the corporate media, and Joe Biden are your enemy.
If you said it about any other, first of all, you're always right when you say it. Those press people's job is to be your enemy, and the media is supposed to be their enemy and attack them.
That's right.
And not get them a cake. Like, that's her job. And now she's in the media? That's not like a grotesque conflict of interest? You put the liar in the job of talking about the story.
Just to put a button on this, including Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers, the government has used the Espionage Act 10 times to prosecute government workers who shared classified information with journalists. Yes, if we go back to 1945, there's one more case. So of those 11 cases, 7 of them have taken place under Barack Obama. Barack Obama used it 7 times. Before Trump, it was only used 11 times in the history of our country.
But the Espionage Act, Bush?
Including Cheney and Bush.
The torture people.
That's right. And Barack Obama was putting taps on phones of journalists. We found that out. Here's what Ron Paul says. Julian Assange, along with whistleblowers who revealed to us the evil that's being done in our name, are heroes. They deserve our respect and admiration, not a prison cell. Julian Assange, forget Russia. The real threat to America comes from Israel and the Israel lobby.
Well, now he should never get out.
So who is the enemy of the people? It's this push.
This week, Donald Trump took to truth.
It's that woman. And of course, that's the kind of people they get to lie to you. They get a redheaded white woman who looks innocent. She wouldn't lie. She doesn't look like a criminal.
Welcome inside me.
Look, that's why they get nerds like Chris Hayes to lie to you, because he doesn't look like a criminal. He looks like a nerd. Nerds would never lie to you. That's why they get people like Rachel Maddow to lie to you, because she's a homosexual. Gay people are the greatest things you could ever be. They're born with virtue because they have sex with the people who have their same gender. That makes them way better than you morally. They would never lie.
Out of the gate.
Rachel Maddow's the biggest fucking liar in the world. Bigger liar than Trump.
I don't even
Bigger
believe she's
liar than
lesbian
me. Bigger liar than anybody. What'd you say?
I don't even think she's a lesbian, frankly. She's
I
such a
bet
liar.
she's not even a lesbian. That's
She's
how
such
much
a
of
liar.
a
I
she's
have a hard
such a
time believing.
I bet. I can't. There isn't enough swear words in my brain to use for Jen Psaki in the garbage. Imagine being a producer on that show. Imagine someone going to work knowing you're lying, knowing the real journalists that she helped prosecute, Julian Assange, that she ran lies for the people who were trying to kill Julian Assange, Edward Snowden.
Who was Trump's guy, the fat one that they used to make fun
I
of?
can't remember his name.
I can't believe there was even any uproar that he was on Dancing with the Stars.
Right? Yeah.
Which is 1,000% where she should be.
That's where she should.
Not anywhere near the news that she's not as a person whose job it is to obfuscate the news.
We're doing live comedy shows in Oxnard, California, Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Michigan, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, and Boston. Plus, we're going to put a date in Edmonton, Canada, plus Vancouver. See ya. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.